All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for actually finding this room in the bowels of the conference center here. So has everyone lost about like 5-6 pounds already hiking around a day? I've learned that when I started this morning. So I'm Brad McCabe. Up on stage with me I have Jerry Honeycutt here as well.
Hi.
And today we're going to talk about deploying the core optimized desktop with Microsoft Deployment Kit 2010 and the Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager. No, I did not lose a bet to see how long of a name we could make for this. I inherited the title, but it is pretty descriptive. So how many of you were in the foundation session a little bit earlier that Gabriella did? So, good bit, about half or so. So we're going to talk about some of the different technologies that she was showing in there. As you come through this session, understand we're going to talk about deploying these technologies. We're going to look a lot at System Center, Configuration Manager, and we're going to look a lot at MDT. We'll spend a lot of time in the tools. We are not, however, going to go very deep into the individual components. I'll do a little bit of a setup just to make sure if you're not familiar with one or two of the technologies to give you a little bit of a base to start from. But there are a lot of good sessions as the week goes on. So if you become interested in AppV or you want to learn more about Office or any of the things we look at, definitely go to those sessions. I'll have a list at the end, and you can go much deeper into the individual technologies there. So let's start out with the optimized desktop. We'll sort of start out at 100,000 feet and we'll work our way down a little bit. So what is the optimized desktop? Or, as we just decided to rebrand it now, the flexible workspace. So, you know, gotta update my titles and slide decks. But the optimized desktop is really about making people productive wherever they are, about managing the risk, whether it's through security, whether it's through control, and by reducing PC costs by streamlining the management. These are really the three top pillars that we're after and that we're going for. So when we start out, we've got those pillars there as our mission. If we work in, we've got a lot of technology that makes up the optimized desktop or the flexible workspace. Really, it's in three different rings. The inner ring that you see up here is the client infrastructure. So if I take a look, things like Windows 7, Internet Explorer, Office, and MDOP, the Desktop Optimization Pack, those are sort of our inner ring on the client level. Then if we move out, we've got this server. We've got this server infrastructure ring out here as well. We can have a great client infrastructure, but all of our networking, Active Directory, all of our security, group policies, all these different things come from our server infrastructure. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those pieces in the optimized desktop context. And then kind of the outer ring here is the management infrastructure. I can have fabulous clients, amazing server infrastructure, but if I don't spend any time thinking about management and building out my management, it's all kind of for nothing. I have a great deployment with MDT, but if I can't manage it on day 2, day 3, day 4.
Testing. 1, 2, check. Check, testing.
Can't hear me?
Check.
All right. I feel like a Verizon commercial. I can hear you now.
That's fine.
All right. I'm not sure who that is, but he's very tested. So we have a management infrastructure. So we need to make sure we've got good management out there to make sure that we've got day 2, day 3, day 4, that we can keep up running, keep things patched. Now, one of those things I talked about, and we'll look at a bunch of the different components from there, is this thing called MDOP, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. We love short names at Microsoft. So what do you need to know about MDOP? What are the key takeaways? Well, MDOP is really about 4 different areas. And we're going to look at a couple of these in detail. Application virtualization, the diagnostic and recovery tool set, and then asset inventory services. So we're going to look at those three pieces in particular in a few minutes as we get into some of the demos about installing them and working with them. So let's start with application virtualization, the first piece of the optimized desktop we want to deploy. Application virtualization, or AppV, if you're not familiar with it, is about taking applications and rather than installing them, as you know, traditionally through an MSI, pushing them down to the hard drive, what we do is we package them up so that we can stream them down, we can preload them into the cache, we can do a lot of different things with them from a deployment point of view once we've got them virtualized. The other nice thing about AppV is since they're running in their own virtual bubble, it does great with compatibility. So if you saw this morning in the demos that Chanel did, we had Office 2010 and we had components of Office 2007 running side by side on the same machine. Since they're virtualized out into their own space, they don't step on each other. We don't get those application conflicts. Some other nice things, since I'm usually streaming them down in a lot of instances from the server, I can do things like metering, pay attention to licensing, much easier. I can remove those applications much easier if I need to in the future. So now, from a deployment point of view, I wanted to put a couple of links in here so that if you download the slide deck, you'll have all these links here. Obviously, there won't be a quiz. I don't expect you to memorize them. But there's a couple of things that you need to think about from an AppV point of view. There's actually 3 prerequisites to the client that I have to push out there. If I run setup.exe when I do the deployment, setup.exe will actually push all these out there for me. If I run the client install through the MSI, though, I need to install these myself. So here are the links if you choose to go down that route, and you'll need these. Also, we'll take a look at these, but I wanted to throw into the deck so you had a copy. Here's a link out also to all of the different command line switches and parameters. And we'll take a look at some of those as we move through. So let me turn it over to Jerry here.
Everybody can hear me okay? All right, unlike Brad, I'm stuck right here, so I'm not going to be pacing around making you follow me. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the environment that I'm going to be demonstrating from here. I've got Configuration Manager 2007 R2 updated to R3 installed here. I've also fully configured OSD, and I've enabled integration with the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. So you'll see the MDT task sequences in here. As well, I've got a few shortcuts here, so I might as well explain those now. All of my source files are, for all of my demos are combined under this one source folder. You'll see that quite frequently in the demos. And so that you don't have to bear through me hunting and pecking on the keyboard, all of the command lines I'm going to be showing you are in my little snippets text folder here. So the first thing I wanted to show you is in Configuration Manager, we're going to deploy the AppV 4.6 client. Before we do that, though, we need to enable application virtualization in Configuration Manager. So there's 2 things we need to do. First, on the distribution point, we need to make sure that we've enabled bits HTTP and HTTPS streaming. And that is enabled in this case by default, but you want to make sure this checkbox is enabled. Second, we want to enable virtual application streaming on the distribution point by enabling this checkbox. And then the second thing we want to do is on the Advertise Programs Client Agent, we also want to enable advertising virtual applications. So with those options enabled, we're ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do, obviously, is deploy our AppV client. And I'm going to create a package for the client. I'll just use some shorthand here. And Brad, feel free to fill in any dead air while I type some of these.
If you like,
no.
I could.
Well,
I do my American Idol. I can start singing for you.
Do what?
I'll do an American Idol impression. I'll start singing back here
there
for
you go. Okay. So I've added the package files, and all this has done is basically told Configuration Manager what files are in my package. So now I need to create a program. And like Brad had mentioned, you can run setup.exe to install all the prerequisites in advance, which is what I'm going to do here. Or you can use extract the MSI file and deploy that. In Configuration Manager, I'm going to show you how to deploy setup.exe quietly so that it installs silently. In a minute, I'm going to go to MDT and show you what it looks like to actually deploy all of the components necessary for the MSI file individually. And it's actually pretty cool in MDT. So first, let me create the program for this. And there is a package definition file that comes with Configuration Manager. It's in the Tools folder. I'm doing it the hard way so that you can see it. Okay, this is the command line to install the @v client silently. You can grab this from the package definition file. It's also on the pages that describe installing the @v client. There's no reason to reproduce this by hand, but this is an install shield installer, and these are typical install shield command line options. I'm going to restrict this to x64 Windows 7 machines. And the other thing that I want to do, because in this case, I'm not actually going to advertise this to my clients, I'm going to add this to a task sequence. So I need to enable this option to make sure that the program can install in a task sequence, even though it's not advertised. And that's it. I'm going to click through the rest of the wizard, and I'm done with adding the program. And then last, I simply need to add a distribution point to this package. And there's two distribution points here. You'll notice, if you're not familiar with Configuration Manager, one of them is the software distribution point, and this is actually my Pixie share here for my Pixie boot images. So I'm going to add that to my software distribution point, and I'm done. So the next step is to actually add that to the task sequence. And down here under operating system deployment, you see my task sequences. I've already defined one that deploys Windows 7 Enterprise x64. I haven't advertised this yet, but I'm going to edit this task sequence and add the @v client to it. So I'll just pick a nice logical place for that. Install software, grab my package, and I'm done. Now in Configuration Manager, oddly enough, I find myself saying it's a lot easier in Configuration Manager than it is in MDT. Because in MDT, by using the MSI file, we're going to have several commands that we're going to actually have to install. So in MDT, and of course this is going to be a light touch installation. You can get this to the point to where the user logs on, the rest is database driven or whatever, but it's still a light touch installation no matter how you cut it. So here I'm going to add the three requirements, and those are the Visual C++ 2005 runtime, SP1, the 2008 runtime, the Dr. Watson application error reporting. Then we can actually install the @v client. So bear with me while I add each of these commands to MDT. And I will use some shortcuts here to speed this along. Whoops. So my command line to install the VC runtime silently is simply add a /q on the end of that. Okay, I'm going to add the same application for the Visual C 2008 runtime.
Now, for folks also, while Jerry's cutting and pasting these in, if you're looking to actually try this, there is also a hands-on lab out there this week. So if you want to sit down and actually walk through these different steps on your own, the lab manual will take you both through the MDT side and then also through the System Center Configuration Manager side. It's a little bit different than how we're doing it here, just because you have to sometimes switch things up when you do them in a live presentation, but the core of it is still the same thing.
Right. So on the application error reporting component that is required, you don't actually have to download that separately. That comes with the @v client. If you look under each folder, there's a support folder and Watson. It's that Watson folder that you want to add to your deployment share. And the command line for that is a little bit more complicated. It's a typical MSI exec installer. So we're going to have the /q for the quiet. We're going to specify the package name. These command lines are actually in here for configuration manager, so let me shorten that up a little bit. The one thing that you do have to do is you have to add this app GUID property to your command line. And if you look at the installation documentation for the AppV client, it's got a list of the GUIDs and the different AppV versions that belong to each one. So what we're basically doing is tying this application error reporting installation to the specific AppV client that we're deploying. This is, the client is 4.6 without SP1, so that's what this GUID belongs to. And then, of course, we're going to suppress any reboots. So I'm going to grab this whole command line and paste it.
And all of those GUIDs are out in those links that were in the prior slides.
The AppV installation documentation includes a table that includes all these different GUIDs. Now, the quick and easy way to get that is you can either open the MSI to edit that using, what's the name of the tool, used to be called Orca or something like that. Or if you install the client and you just look at the setup log file, the product GUID is right at the top of the log file and you can just grab it from there. So with that added, I'm ready to take on the last step, which is to actually install the AppV client. If you've ever deployed the AppV client before, the command line will look kind of familiar here. And these command line options for the AppV client are fully documented on the AppV deployment guides. So what we're doing here with this one is we're using the MSI file to install it. We have to allow independent file streaming because we're actually going to cache the Office 2010 files locally. So in order to allow this stuff to stream independently, we set this option on here. And then the rest of the typical, the publishing server friendly name, type, and host. So I'll copy and paste that. Now the trick to doing this, if you've never used MDT before, is we now need to define some dependencies for this application. So the AppV client is dependent on those three previous applications. So we're going to make it dependent on 2005, 2008, runtime, and then the application error reporting package we just added. So now what's going to happen is when you add the AppV 4.6 client to the task sequence, MDT is going to come along and say, well, this has some dependencies. So it's going to first install these dependencies in the order that you see here, and then it's going to install the client. The last step is like before, I already have a task sequence defined in MDT for Windows 7. So I'm going to edit this task sequence, find a nice logical place to install the client. And we're done. So now when I roll out this task sequence, the AppV client and all of its dependencies will also get installed as part of that deployment. And of course, in a demo in a little while, we're also going to show you how to add the Office 2010 AppV packages during deployment as well. So back to you.
So it's actually a good segue. So we've just gone through, we've actually put the steps in now to push down the AppV client. Now with AppV, there's a couple of different options that I was talking about. As we did right there at the end on the MDT, we've set it up to actually go out and stream down. So when I log in, I would see the Office icon, I'd double click on it, and the app would stream down and then cache locally the first time. Now, with Office, if I'm on the local network, I mean, this could take the first time I do it 20, 30 seconds. Things are kind of busy, 30, 40 seconds. But if I've got a user, say, out over the WAN, I don't know if I really want that stream to happen. So what I can actually do is go out and preload the Office application, or any application, but in this case we're just looking at Office, to the AppV cache. So what I can do then through my task sequence is actually install the AppV client and then as part of that process, pull down that package right away. So I've already got it there cached on my machine. That way, when the user clicks it, I can start up and run that immediately. So I'll send it back over to Jerry, and we'll take a look at pre-populating that.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. All right, so when you're deploying, Ryan Seacrest is the analogy I'm making over here. When you're deploying the Virtual Office 2010 application package, there's actually a prereq that you need to deploy. And if you go do the hands-on lab, or you look at the white paper we have out there about deploying the optimized desktop, it's missing that prereq. And what that is the Office deployment kit for virtual applications. And I'm going to show you how to deploy that. First up is in Configuration Manager. And this is going to be business as usual for an application. So we will just call this appvert or offvert. There is an x64 and an x86 version of this MSI file when you download it. When you download the file, you're actually going to have to run the executable and then extract it. It's going to ask where you want to extract the folders, and then you end up with these MSI files. So I'll create the package.
So the Office Vert piece is actually just specific to Office. So we can push out the AppV client. Now any of our virtual apps are good to go. The Office Vert is actually, when you virtualize Office, it's a piece for licensing. So you would need to then push that out if you're going to push out Office.
Yeah, it does licensing, but it also handles some of the integration between the different Office bits. So the piece on the command line that you have to add is how you want to handle activation. And in this case, I've set the command line option or property Pro Plus equals 1, telling it that I'm deploying Office Professional Plus 2010, and I'm going to use KMS activation. There's other options for deploying Mac activation and so on. There's some more detailed command line options you have to do when you're actually sequencing Office, and you'll use this offvert application for that as well. If you go to TechNet and you just search for Office Deployment Kit, you will find all the different command line options with step-by-step instructions for using it to both sequence applications as well as deploy virtualized Office 2010. So I'm going to grab the command line, paste it in here. Sorry, I'm getting old, need my glasses. And then last, I will distribute that. And again, this is going to go into my task sequence, so I'm not going to advertise this to existing clients right now. So that takes care of offvert. What I also need to do is I need to add the Office 2010 virtual application. So this has already been sequenced previously, and I've enabled virtualization in Configuration Manager. So I'm going to create a new virtual application package. And I'm going to go grab my Office 2010 manifest file. This basically defines all the applications that are being published in this stream. And you'll see that when I grab that manifest file, I get a list. These are all the, I don't know how Notepad ended up in my sequence, but you get a list, you see all the applications that are actually in that package. This option here, remove this package when the clients are no longer being advertised to. In other words, if a client is moved out of a collection, that package will get removed from that client. That option is only available for virtual application packages. And it's kind of akin to how scope works in group policy for software installation. When a client is no longer influenced by that GPO, the software can be removed. That's an option there as well. So I need to specify a data source for this. We're going to write this to our SMS server. And I pre-created this folder, and hopefully I typed that correctly. Now this is actually going to, because it's a fairly large package, so this is going to take a while, and I'm going to let Brad get back to work. And when we get back, I'll show you that this is being copied over to the share.
So we've taken so far, we've pushed out the AppV client. Now we've pushed out Office Vert so that we can push Office there. We've taken the Office package and we've pre-populated that into the cache. Now we're going to shift gears into another tool out there, the Diagnostic and Recovery Toolset. This is actually one of my favorite tools in all of MDOP. It's been out there for a while. If you're familiar with WinTernals many years ago as part of that acquisition, some of those tools we've pushed out onto TechNet free. Others of them, with some other ones that have come from other sources and been written internally, have gone in to make up Dart. Dart is built on top of WinRE and then adds on about 14 different tools. So if you've ever booted into WinRE, you'll notice the screen on the left, but if you've got MDOP and you've put Dart out there, you'll get this other one down the bottom that says Microsoft Diagnostic and Recovery Toolset. If I click on that, this is where I see all the different Dart tools. Now, in Dart 7, which was just announced not too long ago, will be shipping very, very soon, you'll see this option down here that says Remote Connection. If I've got a machine that won't boot up into Windows, won't even boot into safe mode, I can actually use Dart to repair it. With the Remote Connection option in Dart 7, I can be sitting, say, at my desk in Redmond, get a call from Jerry standing here on stage in Atlanta going, help me, my machine is toast. And as long as I've got corporate network access, I can reach out, take control of his machine in WinRE with Dart and actually repair it. Now, if you're familiar with Dart, in the past, we only supported distributing Dart on a CD or DVD. It's probably not a good thing if I have to fly to Atlanta to hand Jerry the DVD to fly back to my desk in Redmond so I can use remote control. So in Dart 7, we support Pixie Boot, we support USB Boot, and we also support one other new form, which is actually deploying Dart to the local hard drive. So when you deploy Windows 7, it actually makes a hidden partition that WinRE is in. Since Dart is built on top of WinRE, I can actually replace, as I'm installing Windows 7, that version of RE with the version that has Dart inside of it. And what that means then is when Jerry calls me up, rather than flying here with my DVD, I say, Jerry, hit F8. When Jerry hits F8 and he goes into the recovery environment, he has all of the tools, including remote control. He can click on that, and I can enable it. So there is... Later this week, there is a session on Dart 7 if you're interested in the remote control and such that will go into much greater detail onto all of these tools. But let's switch over and let's take a look, because to replace that partition becomes a little bit tricky, especially if I'm thinking about enabling BitLocker on that drive as well as part of my Windows 7 deployment.
But wait, I want to finish the Office demo.
I got all excited.
I wanted you to see that the Office application has been successfully added, or the virtualized Office package has been successfully added. So now what we're going to do is we're going to distribute this, because I want to add this to the task sequence, and I want to cache that locally in my clients. So we're going to distribute this. And again, it's the same old distribution point here. Now, for some reason, this is the point to where my VMs start to grind down, is about the time I add the Office application here. So it takes a little while for these VMs to catch up with everything. So that's distributed. Now what I'm going to do is head down here to the task sequence and add both the Office Deployment Kit and the Office 2010 Application Virtualization AppV package to my task sequence.
While we wait for the VMs to catch up. There are, if you're interested, also in Dart, I know they have a bunch of USB sticks with the Dart 7 bits and ISOs and everything on it. So if you want to go back tonight and play around with MDT and some of the stuff we're going to show you in a minute, but you don't have access to MDOP, you can actually just run over to the booth and get one of those Dart sticks, and it'll have all the ISOs and everything for the beta on there for you.
Okay, so I've just added the Office Deployment Kit to my task sequence. Now I'm going to add Office. And you'll notice when I add the Office package, I won't get an option to choose a program. And there we're done. And that's going to take a little while for everything to catch up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move over and demonstrate adding Dart. This is actually probably the most complicated demo we're going to do today because there's a lot to getting Dart installed on a PC when you're using MDT or a configuration manager. I'm going to be doing that demo in Microsoft Deployment Toolkit.
What's that? Yeah, the USB sticks at the booth, you mean? Yeah, they have, if you stick them in a machine, like if you actually have a dead machine, it's got the 32-bit ISO that will immediately boot. But on that stick is the installer for both the 32 and the 64. So you can actually install it if you have a 64 or want a 64-bit image and just build your own. There's a booth titled Windows 7 with MDOP right in the Windows client area. It's actually right across from the deployment booth. So,
come see me when we're done. I bet I can hook you up. I have one key up here. So, yes, sir. Right. So the question is there a way to get the best of both worlds? In other words, can I stream applications with the configuration manager as well as add them to the local cache? And configuration manager does support streaming via HTTPS and HTTP. So you can advertise it to the client and stream it over HTTP. It doesn't support the management server, obviously, and I'm not sure that you would want to have two different infrastructures for managing apps anyway, but it does support both. Yes?
Yeah, so you would you'd set it up to advertise it, but then you'd also follow the steps that he just did to publish it.
Right. All right, so here's the problem with Dart in a deployment share. So if you're going to deploy your Windows 7 images and you're going to enable BitLocker in MDT, and by the way, speaking of BitLocker, it's always been a challenge to deploy BitLocker through MDT because when you deploy it with a pin, you get the same pin everywhere, right? The problem with that is how do I get users who are standard user accounts, I hope, how do I reset all their pins? So there's a lot of challenges with deploying BitLocker via MDT. We have a new product in MDOP called Microsoft BitLocker Administration Monitoring. Fabulous product. You can use it to configure BitLocker as part of the Windows 7 rollout. In other words, you roll out Windows 7, the MBAM client will ask the user for a new pin for that machine. Or you can actually use it to provision BitLocker after a Windows 7 rollout. It's a fabulous product. If you're using BitLocker, I suggest you go take a look at AJ or Anthony Smith's session on MBAM. So the problem here is when you deploy Windows 7 in MDT, you end up with these two partitions. By default, Windows RE is going to be installed on your operating system disk or volume, drive C. And this over here is your BitLocker partition, right? So if you encrypt this drive, you're not going to be able to start Dart until Windows actually starts. So what we need to do to make sure that Dart is going to be available without actually decrypting the drive is we need to get Dart from this drive to installing it on this drive. Now here's the second problem. The Dart image is 297 megabytes. The additional support files required push it over 300 megabytes. 300 megabytes is the default volume size for the BDE drive. So we have two things we have to do. We're going to have to increase the size of the BDE drive, and then we're going to have to actually relocate the Windows RE image from drive C to drive D. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. We have a new set of videos coming out that show all of these topics, by the way, and those will be out in the next month and a half or so that will provide walkthroughs of each of these. So the first thing we need to do is, in order to manipulate that BDE drive, we're going to have to show the drive. So we're going to have to assign it a drive letter, and then when we're done, we're going to have to hide the drive. So I've written a couple of scripts for this part here. The first script simply assigns a drive letter, S, to the BDE drive, and we're making some assumptions about where the drives are going to be located. If you look at this script, we're assuming disk 0, partition 2 is where the BDE drive is going to be located. And in general, when you're deploying with MDT, that is going to be true. And then the second script simply removes the drive letter to hide it once again. The other thing that we need to do in preparation is we need to grab, well, let's go ahead and grab these first. And we're going to drop those in our script root for the deployment share, which is simply scripts. The second thing we need to do is we need to go grab our Dart image or our boot.wim file off of the Dart media. So if you load your CD, as I have here, look in sources, this boot WIM file is the WIM file that we want. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to drop that in script root. And then just to make it a little bit easier for myself, the file name for the Windows RE image is WinRE. I'm going to go ahead and rename that file. So the files are all in the right place. So I'm going to tackle the first problem now, which is the size of the BitLocker drive partition. So in our custom settings.ini file, and in Configuration Manager, you can use collection variables to define this. But here I'm going to change this in custom settings.ini. And the property that you're trying to set is BDE drive size. And you want it to be 500. It's just about the right size. So what will happen is when MDT deploys the Windows 7 image from this deployment share, instead of a 300 gigabyte drive, it's going to create a 500 gigabyte volume for the BitLocker partition. So that fixes that problem. Now, if you look at the white paper on deploying the optimized desktop and you go to the labs, there is a script called ZTI WinRE, something like that. The problem is that script does not work very well. There's some timing issues. It doesn't work consistently in every environment. So what we're recommending now is just a series of steps in a task sequence. And I'm going to show you each one of those. Whoops. Now you want to do this obviously before enabling BitLocker. So I enable BitLocker in this step. So I'm going to, under custom tasks, add a new group and simply call this add and move Dart.
Sounds like a good joke next door.
Sounds like a really good one. All right. So the commands that we need to implement are these. The first thing we need to do is take that script and we need to show the BitLocker drive. So we'll add that one. And all this is going to do, this command line, we're not going to sow it, we're going to show it. All this command line is going to do is assign a drive letter to the BDE partition.
So this is running the disk part that we just looked at.
Yep. So the next command, can everyone see these commands in the back okay, by the way, or do I need to enlarge them? Everybody okay? All right. So the next command is simply going to create a folder on the BDE drive to host the new WinRE.wim file. And we'll just use a command, the make dir command. And then the next command, we are going to copy the WinRE file I just added to the script root. We're going to copy that to the new folder we created on the BDE drive. And I had already renamed this to WinRE.wim just to make things a little bit simpler for myself. Now, RE agent C, I'm thinking the command line, someone added a C on there so it sounded like recovery agency or something like that. But RE agent C is the command that you use to work with the recovery partition. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disable the current recovery image.
Now your fat fingers did it.
Yeah, I got fat fingers. I grabbed the wrong command line too. So we're going to disable the current recovery image, and then this command, set RE image, is simply going to point Windows to the new recovery image.
So these reagent-c commands are taking so that when we hit F8, we're just wiring it up rather than using the RE version that's on the disk to now point over to the new one.
And we're just going to leave the old files where they are. We're not removing them, hiding them, or doing anything with them. And then the second to the last command, we have to re-enable Windows RE.
If you are feeling particularly ambitious, there is nothing wrong with actually removing those old ones, but for the sake of time, we've sort of left that out. And with today's hard drives, what's a couple hundred megs between friends?
That's right. And then the last step is we need to hide the BDE drive again. So we'll hide the BDE drive by running the script that you saw me, that I showed you just a few minutes ago. And then I think we had a question. Yes, sir. Did you have a question? Sir? Well, certainly you're moving. There's no issues running these commands locally. Where you're going to run into the issue is you're moving the WIM file down, but you're already moving a pretty big WIM file down anyway. And what you're moving down is about another 297 megabytes of file for each image. So yes. Yeah. Whether that's an issue in your environment is something only you can judge. So that is all the commands that are necessary. So what this does is, what we've managed to accomplish is we've increased the size of the BDE drive. We've disabled the previous Windows RE image. We've copied a new one that includes Dart 7.0. We've pointed Windows to that new image and then re-enabled it and hid the BDE drive again. So this will work even if BitLocker is encrypted on that machine, or if BitLocker has encrypted that machine. And it wasn't in our plans, but let me just show you how you enable BitLocker here. Actually, it's enabled by default here on this. In Configuration Manager, the BitLocker step is disabled by default, and you would go to Options, you would deselect Disable this step.
Thank you, sir. So now we've got our AppV client out there. We've pushed out Office. We're able to recover because we've got Dart. Another thing I would push out there potentially as part of the optimized desktop is the Asset Inventory Services client. Now, we're going to demo this in MDT. And the reason for that is because if I've got Config Manager and I'm using Config Manager, I've already got asset capabilities inside of Config Manager. Deploying Asset Inventory Services, part of MDOP, would probably be a little redundant. I don't really think I need to inventory everything twice. So if I'm using Config Manager, I probably wouldn't do this step because I've got another alternative. But if I'm using MDT and I've got MDOP at my disposal, AIS is a great tool to go out and run inventories of software, run inventories of hardware with the 2.0 version, take into a lot of really robust reporting and such to figure out what I've got out in the world.
And we're back to me.
And we're back to you.
Great. So when you download if you're not familiar with Asset Inventory Service, how many people have seen Windows Intune, seen the demos, because it's being shown quite a bit? So Asset Inventory Service looks almost identical to Windows Intune as far as the inventory piece of it. So your account management, the inventory, the alerting system, it's all pretty much the same look as Windows Intune. Basically, Windows Intune is AIS with a whole lot of other stuff right on top of it. So you deploy it the same way you deploy the Windows Intune client. When you download the client, you get this. You get an executable file, and you get a certificate. This certificate uniquely identifies your organization. It's what the client uses to enroll in your service. So you need to keep this certificate together with the executable file and with the MSI files, which I'm about to extract, at all times. But you also want to keep it under a little bit of a lock and key. You don't want just anyone adding clients to your AIS service. So to extract the MSI files, which is what we're going to deploy, You run the extract command line option, just let it extract into the current folder. And so what we ended up with here is an x64 and an x86 client. And again, you want to keep that account start file in the same folder as your MSI files. Now, I'm going to demonstrate doing this one in Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. It works just like any other application distribution in Configuration Manager. We are on version 2.0 of AIS. There's some new features that you might want to take a look at if you haven't looked at AIS lately. And then the command line to deploy that, it's a very simple, straightforward MSI command line, /Q/I, and you're done. And then the last step, of course, is going to be to add this to your task sequence. Now the AIS client will actually be installed with Windows 7 when you roll this out.
Thank you, sir. So compared to some of the other ones, that was pretty straightforward. Biggest thing, as Jerry was saying, is make sure you keep the certificate there. Just a few more pieces to take a look here. Part of the optimized desktop. We talked about that management layer. Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010 is out there really as part of the optimized desktop for things like protection, security, malware, all that fun goodness. I'm not a Forefront guy, but there's a good slide from them. So let's talk about actually getting it out there. What I know better, which is deployment.
I am not a Forefront guy either, but I do know how to get the client out there. And the command line for a solid installation of the Forefront Endpoint Protection Client is simply /S. And rather than walk you through another package in NDT, I'm just going to show you the command line and tell you as well, there's just a handful of command line options for the Forefront client, the management group, and so on. All of those are documented on TechNet. There's an article about installing the Forefront client using various methods. So take a look at that. And obviously, there's group policy for further configuring the client.
Now, the last section I did want to spend a little bit of time on, and this is user state virtualization. For those of you that were in the foundation session this morning, you saw a lot of this in action. When Chanel logged into the laptop PC and changed the background, made some edits to the file, and then went over to the slate and logged into there, and all those changes followed her. That was all done with user state virtualization. It's really made up of three key technologies: folder redirection, very tightly coupled with offline files, and roaming user profiles. So the first one is folder redirection. There's been a lot of improvements and enhancements. This was first introduced a while ago in XP, enhanced in Vista, further enhanced in Windows 7. But basically what we're doing is we're taking the files when we're on a PC, and we're taking and we're synchronizing them up to a central location. That way, for one, I have it backed up, so if that PC gets damaged, that PC gets lost or stolen, and say it's my CFO's PC, I don't actually have to say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, I know you lost all the analyst reports for this quarter. You should have backed them up to the network. Sometimes that's what you want to say, but not always what you can say. So that's one of the nice things about folder redirection. The other nice thing about it is that, as you saw in the demo, if I log into one machine, and then I go over to another machine, my folders and my files follow me. Yes, sir? Good question. So talking about the client-side cache and stuff, that's where the offline files come into play here. So if I've got folder redirection, that's one piece of the pie. But the problem is, as this gentleman was just asking in his question, what happens when people are off the corporate network? Well, that's where we get into offline files. So this is the second half. This is keeping a cache locally. Now, one of the really nice things that happened between XP and Windows 7 is this algorithm got a lot of love, a lot of attention. If you've worked with roaming user profiles, offline files, folder redirection, and XP, I would encourage you, if you haven't, to revisit it and look at it again in 7. You will find a lot of enhancements. Most notably, if I log on to this PC and I log on to this PC on XP, very, very bad things happen if I forgot to log off. In 7, with some of the background file syncs and some of the other enhancements there, I can be signed onto this machine and sign on over here, and the world doesn't end.
In general, user virtualization in Windows 7 got not just offline files, but roaming user profiles, folder redirection, got a lot of love since Windows XP. I know that in our company, we've been using user state virtualization in its complete form since about Windows XP, and only with Windows 7 did things actually get to where they worked well. So, and the other thing with Windows 7, offline files are now enabled by default. You don't have to go configure policies to enable those. You get other benefits for roaming user profiles, such as background synchronization and registry settings. So synchronization works a lot better in Windows 7. And there's another question right here. Yes, sir? The question is, what about a mixed environment with Windows XP and Windows 7? In what regard would that be? With roaming user profiles, you're actually going to end up with 2 different profile folders. Your Windows 7 roaming user profile will have a V2 attached to the end of it, and then your XP profile folder will still be out there as well. So you're not going to have collisions between those 2 roaming user profiles on the server. Okay.
Hey, why don't let's hang on to some of the questions, and we'll save a little bit of time as well at the end, just because we're kind of getting down there. So roaming user profiles are the third piece of that. So files are pretty straightforward. Roaming user profiles are things like my background, where my taskbar is, how I like IE set up, those type of things. Those are stored in my user profiles. Roaming user profiles lets every PC that I log into be my PC. And every PC that Jerry logs into has his nice, pretty backgrounds and pictures, and so on around the company. So we're going to take a look at the demo here. But enabling this, it's technology that most people already have. You already own it, so it's not like you're going out and buying something else in a lot of cases. But it really is a core part of the optimized desktop and the flexible workspace to enable that free movement. You know, people have multiple PCs now. People have PCs and devices. So this is pretty important to think through.
And in consumerization scenarios and VDI scenarios where you have a user maybe logs on from their home computer into a virtual desktop back in the data center, this plays even more, makes it, gives users the same experience across not only all of their devices, but also all the locations that they tend to work. So what I'm going to show you is 2 things. There's really not a lot to show you for offline files because it's enabled by default in Windows 7. There are a number of policies that configure offline files. If you look under both the computer configuration and the user configuration nodes, look under networking, there's your offline files policy settings, and you can do things like administratively pin offline files. It's all the same policy settings that have been there for a while, plus a few more. So what I am going to show you is two ways to enable roaming user profiles for Windows 7, and then folder redirection as well. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is create a place to store those roaming user profiles. So I'm going to create this one. I'll just call it home for lack of a better word. And you've got to get the permissions right. Now, the permissions that I'm going to show you here are the bare essentials. If you look online, there's recommendations for all sorts of additional permissions. These are the absolute essentials. Whoops. So we're going to knock off the inherited permissions. In particular, we're going to get rid of users. We're going to get rid of creator owner for now. Because what we want is we want to give users the ability to create a folder at the root of this, but not necessarily browse other users' folders. And then once they've created a folder, we obviously want them to have full control of everything in their roaming user profile and in their redirected folders. So we're going to add users back. And users includes authenticated users. So this would work for any user on the domain. We want this permission only in this folder. And we want them to be able to read folders. I think that gets everything for a read. And we want them to be able to create folders. And that's it. That's all the, traverse. So we have basically read and write in this folder only.
Can't we just give everyone full control?
No, we can't give everyone full control. So the other thing we want to do is give creator-owner full control. Now in this case, we don't want them to have full control of this folder, subfolder, and files. We only want them to have full control of subfolders and files. And then the second step to creating the folder is we also need to share it. So we're going to give the users group full control. This is only full control of the share. The ACL on the actual folder is going to keep them out of other users, roaming user profiles, and their redirected folders. For now, I'm going to copy this folder. We will call this one folders. We'll share this one as well. And full control. So I've created two folders. One is going to house my roaming user profiles. The other is going to be for my redirected folders. So remember, home and folders when I start typing paths, okay?
Home and folders.
Home and folders. So there's two ways to enable roaming user profiles. We can do it the old-fashioned way, which many people probably still enable roaming user profiles this way in ADUC. Basically, go find a user, click the Profile tab, and let's type a path for the folder. So this server is DC01. We called that home, right?
Home and folder.
And username. And it'll automatically replace, I hope, username with that user's actual name. Very good. So that will create the roaming user profile for the user. The other way to do this is to do it on a per machine basis. In ADUC, you're creating a user profile for the user. So no matter which machine that user logs into, the roaming user profile is going to follow them or be created. You can also do this on a, did I just get lost? On a machine basis. So this policy is under computer configuration, policies, system, and then user profiles. Let me get down there. User profiles. And the policy you want to enable is set roaming profile path for all users logging onto this machine. So anytime any user logs onto the machine, regardless of their user object in ADDS, they're going to get a roaming user profile created. So we simply enable this, set our path, and again, it was home.
Home and folders.
You're so good. And this policy applies to the computers, not the users. So on one hand, we have a way to do it for each user. On the other hand, we have a way to do it for each computer. So that's roaming user profiles, the first part of user state virtualization. And the best part I love about this demo and the next is you hear the word virtualization associated with something like user state, and it kind of makes it mystical automatically, right? User state virtualization sounds mystical. But it's really nothing more than enabling roaming user profiles and turning on folder redirection for users. Offline files are already enabled by default. So it's very straightforward stuff. So for the folder redirection policy, that one is under user configuration. Policies, Windows settings, folder redirection. You can redirect pretty much any folder that's found in a profile, in a user profile. And there's a couple of benefits that you get out of this. First, not only are you centralizing users' documents on the server, that's going to make it easier to back up. That's going to help give them the same experience or make all of their stuff available on each PC they use. But you're also moving these files out of the roaming user profile. So if you had someone with a lot of music, a lot of large documents in their user profile, every time Windows 7 syncs with the network, the logon experience gets longer and longer and it starts to drag. I worked on some videos recently where we demonstrated this and I didn't think it was going to be that noticeable. But as soon as we started slapping music into the roaming user profile, the logon experience took a long time. As soon as we deployed folder redirection, the logon experience was near instantaneous again. So to enable this, pick a folder. I'm going to do documents, which is the most obvious thing you want to redirect. and click Properties. And then we can do a basic or an advanced redirection. With basic redirection, which most people are going to end up doing, you create a folder for each user under a path. So we're going to go for Contoso, SMS, DC, right? And these are called folders, right?
Home and folders.
Home and folders.
Am I
So
doing
folders, now what you're going to see here is at the bottom, that shows you what the path is going to look like. So that is all we have to type to enable folder redirection for the documents folder. Now under advanced redirection, you can actually do the same thing on a by group basis. So you can define security groups and then define a different location for each security group. In a larger network, this would be something you would obviously take a look at. But in a lot of cases, this is more than enough. And of course, there's a number of settings that control the folder redirection experience in Windows 7. So for example, you can grant users exclusive access to the redirected folders. I don't think anyone here is seriously going to consider doing that. So you want to leave the administrator and the backup operator on some of these folders. You can opt to apply folder redirection policy to down-level versions of Windows and so on. So these govern the experience with redirected folders. So that is it for user state virtualization. It's actually fairly straightforward.
So a couple of sessions here. Following this today, if you're interested in Dart 7, there's the Dart 7 session. Mentioned MBAM when you're talking about deploying BitLocker. Tomorrow at 3:15 is the MBAM session. We were doing a lot of work with group policy, so there's a advanced group policy management session also tomorrow afternoon at the same time as another general deployment. And Wednesday morning, a little troubleshooting with MDT 2010 Light Touch. Also, some other deployment sessions. Thursday, upgrading Norway. Much deeper if you're interested with deploying Dart on Thursday morning. I've seen this session that Doug does. He's actually the gentleman that did a lot of the work to enable this. It's a really good session. He will go much deeper into all those reagent-c commands and such. So if you're interested in there, user state migration tool, and a few other sessions as the week goes on. Don't forget when you leave, we've got a lot of great prizes if you complete your evaluation. Someone asked me what that prize was in the middle there. The best I can tell is that is a USB defibrillator paddle kit. So I encourage you to try to win one and figure out what it is for me so I can tell people the correct terms. So with that, I wanted to leave a little bit of time, so we've got about 10 minutes actually in the session time for Q&A. And I also know it's quite a hike to the other sessions, so I wanted to be respectful to get people where they need to be if you have to. So with that, we'll open the mics up, and we'll also be around if you have questions.
And before y'all do that, here's my trivia question. I've got a power stick here. Who can tell me on the IT crowd how they answer the phone? Not anyone in a green shirt, by the way. In the back. This is yours. The IT crowd. Who can tell? Oh, have you tried turning it off and on again? If you've never seen the IT crowd, we're all geeks. This is all IT. It's the only show I've ever seen about IT. I absolutely love that show.
So I've got one more. So
you're going to ask a legitimate question, aren't you?
I was actually thinking about just winging it, but
liability.
I'm not sure what LCA would think about that. They are. I did open it up. They are much smaller than the box. You got another trivia question?
No, I do not.
That's no good.
Think of one.
All right.
Okay, according to the IT crowd, what happens when you type the word Bing into the Bing address bar? Give it to him.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right.
And the answer to that, if you didn't hear, was you break the internet.
All right. Any questions? Anyone at the mics as I stare into the lights? Can you just step up to the mic? Oh.
There's been a lot of work done, say, from XP to Win 7 regarding user state.
Right.
For those folks out there who utilize Citrix, one of the challenges is
That's honestly not a question I can answer. I've worked on some Citrix stuff recently, but Zen app and those types of things. So what I would suggest for that is, do we have any Citrix kind of sessions, or maybe stopping by the Citrix booth?
Stop by the Windows with MDOT booth, and there's a gentleman, AJ Smith. He's actually the product owner for user state virtualization. Yes, so he would be.
I'll be over there at 5:30, so maybe wait until then, and I can talk to him with you and tell him what we talked about.
It's a long shot, but it's one of those things we've been challenging for years.
Right. Right.
Like web auditors, would I get to download the video that you guys, the process that you guys say today?
We are working on some deployment videos for MDOP that shows you how to deploy the various MDOP clients using various methods. And there are ways out. We're still in production on those.
They're a couple of weeks out. They'll be up on the TechNet WAC Windows site. There's a link for deployment, and we'll post them all up in there in the next few weeks.
It's a total of about 20 videos or so.
Yeah. Also, if you subscribe to the Springboard blog, if you go out to TechNet WAC Windows, there's a lot of great information that comes out, a lot of great technical information on the Springboard blog. But when we post those videos, we will definitely announce it up on there as well. So if you don't want to keep checking the site every couple of days, every few weeks. There is an older video out there if you go into Bing and you search for deploying the optimized desktop. But we've kind of overhauled the video, the process. It's a little bit stale and dated, but there is one out there.
You guys have some tech documenting about implementing the dark like you did today?
You're working on a deployment white paper, and in addition, I've got some videos that I'm working on as well. So.
Yeah, so there'll be videos and white papers on that. Doug's session, I would also on Thursday highly recommend.
The deck he's using actually displays the steps step by step. You'll see each task sequence step as a screenshot or whatever. So if I don't know if you guys are going to be provided with these decks, but his deck is good enough that you can get the steps right off the deck.
Yeah, Doug, the Thursday at 10:15, Doug wrote most of the code and the process and procedures. So he'll go much deeper in that. And as Jerry was saying, if you can't make it, download his deck because he actually has everything painfully documented in there. Yes, sir.
In the configuration manager, you showed where when you enter a command line for a new program in the package, you have a limitation of some number of characters. Do you know if there are any ways to expand?
Oh, no, I do not know. The question is there any way to expand the limitation on the number of characters in a command line? And I don't know if there's a way to expand that or not. I don't know if there's any sessions or where I could point you for that, but...
see me afterwards, and I'll get you an email of someone that would know that answer.
I had a question about
but I don't know if that's a
integration with SCCM.
With what's it?
EPI integration with...
Yes.
MDT.
Oh, MDT,
MDT.
yes.
Well, on the console, we were discussing with the consultant, and he really recommended against using integration. Any reason for that?
Who recommended against?
It was a consultant we were working with.
Yeah, I can't think of... I don't know, it might be a subjective thing. It might be old school versus new school. MDT does add a new task sequence with a lot in it that does a lot of work.
The reason why I ask is I'm just trying to work around lang packs. We only have like maybe 6, and putting them in the image still kind of leaves a stack.
Right.
So just trying to see it. I mean, I believe MDT would be the better solution to install.
Are you talking about the whole idea of thin versus thick? You're trying to avoid making a thick image with all this stuff in it? Or,
I mean, it's sort of maybe as it stands.
Right.
And then the other problem I run into is just the office lang pack.
Right.
The same packs in. I mean, that grows, that's fine, but the overall OS, I think, could use some slimming down.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a huge proponent of thin imaging. Incidentally, I don't think you should put anything in an image. I'm a believer that you deploy the raw RTM Windows 7 image and everything else comes after. The problem is because if you're deploying a thick image, even with device drivers or even the smallest bit of packages in them, now you've got something else you're maintaining, and that can get way out of control really fast.
Well, I also asked because I did some offline servicing to push the language packs in.
Right. See, in MDT, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you just drop it in the packages folder.
My early tests seemed MDTs would be fine, but when we went to deploy the consultant, Stephanie said, I believe it's subjective.
I'm not. I think it's probably subjective. I've been involved with the MDT team since like 2001, and I have to say I'm subjective there as well because it's a product I absolutely adore. So you're going to get a subjective answer no matter what you do here.
I think I go with yours.
Take care.
Well, I let him be subjective because he actually doesn't work for Microsoft, so he gets to be independent. I actually.
The gentleman I work with didn't either.
Yeah. I work for Microsoft, and shockingly, I adore MDT as well.
Yeah, MDT is just a fabulous product, and Michael Niehaus, the lead developer on MDT, who started it from basically the ground up, is an amazing guy, and he's put a lot of effort into that product.
Yeah, pretty educated on it, but again, I'm looking at with the production rollout we did.
Right.
So I disagreed, but.
Well, it could be a situation where the consultant had a bad experience or something went wrong, and since then he's just, maybe he was using an older version before update 1 or something. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons. I mean, yeah.
All right. So with that,
I think we're done.
anyone else, feel free to
Yes, sir.
fill out.